Dobar dan, dobrodošli u još jedan Wine Vision podcast. Danas imamo jednog zaista specijalnog gosta. Gospodin Peter Moser je urednik Falstaff magazina. Falstaff magazin je austrijski vinski magazin koji izlazi u redakciji nekoliko zemalja. Postoji austrijsko izdanje, postoji nemačko izdanje, postoji švajcarsko izdanje i postoji izdanje na engleskom koje je usmereno na publiku iz celog sveta, ono koje ne razume nemački, tako. On je na čelu Falstaffa od 1997. godine i za vreme njegovog mandata, koji još uvek traje, taj magazin je postao jedan od najuticajnijih u Evropi i slobodno možemo da kažemo i na svetu. Gospodin Moser je 3. put u Srbiji, a ovih dana je boravio kod nas, posećujući vinarije u raznim regionima i potrošivši na to skoro 7 dana. Dakle, prošao je od Subotice do Župe, Negotina, Šumadije i posetio zaista impresivan broj vinarija. Šta on misli o vinskoj sceni u Srbiji, šta misli gde nam je mesto u svetu, kako poredi balkanska vina sa onima koje dolaze iz mnogo slavnijih vinskih regiona, šta očekuje od ovogodišnjeg Wine Visiona, razgovarat ćemo danas sa njim. Ja ću morati da se sa srpskog prebacim na engleski jezik i tako ćemo voditi ceo podcast. Mr. Moser, hello and thank you for being here.
Good morning, it's my pleasure to be here after this very interesting day, so I'm looking forward to your questions.
Yeah, you spent 6 days in Serbia this time till now. You have to leave today, as I know. So thank you on the first place for accepting the invitation to be our guest here in the podcast. And I already explained something about you and who you are actually and about your career. So let's start our talking about you and Falstaff magazine, actually. So you are positioned as editor-in-chief of the Falstaff magazine from 1997.
Yes.
So it's a really long career, long tenure. So what are the major changes that occurred the global wine media since those days, and how did they impact the wine business?
Well, this is a very good question, because I think in the 90s there was not that much wine media around. So if you're looking back, there were some better known publications. So most of the European countries have their kind of older ones. Say there's the Revue de Vin in France, for instance. You've got the Wine Spectator in America. Robert Barker was already active with his Wine Advocate, and it was at this time a printed edition because, online was not there.
Yeah.
Internet was
no internet
on the very beginning. So it was much about printed media. But all these medias, Decanter in England, of course, not to forget, had a quite small very not limited, but let's say they printed about some 10,000 copies for the whole world market. And so I think that wine media was something read by mainly producers on one hand and sommeliers and a little bit connoisseurs. That's it. And this changed totally because we are more and more addressing the consumer, of course, which is much more easier with all this new kind of communication. Let's start with online, but you've got all the social medias like Facebook, Insta, podcasts, and so on. So we reach by far more people today than we could reach eventually 30 years ago. So also the topics had to change, because wine is a very nice thing, a very interesting thing, but if you want to transport the topics of your wine report, you have to present it in a kind of basket of different other things like traveling, gastronomy, of course. I would say all things in lifestyle which makes the living more interesting, more fun.
Yeah. But regarding online media nowadays, what do you think? What is the future of the printed media, traditional media in general?
Yeah, I remember about 20 years ago, the rumor started, that online will destroy the printed media, so they will disappear. But as long as Falstaff is concerned, that's not true at all. Yeah? You need both. There's more than one column for this kind of communication, and it depends. Of course, it depends on the character of a magazine. We decided only 12 years ago to rethink Falstaff completely, because in the older days we just had a limited kind of printing, and we reached mainly men. So, on the other hand, we thought, what can we do to get broader and broader? And so we decided to become something like, I'm a little bit exaggerating, the Vogue of wine and gourmet. And so we switched and said, what are people interested in? They have certain desires. If you think about cars, you are not probably think about the next Opel. Maybe you think you would be interested to see, not to buy, obviously, the next Ferrari or what. So if you do a reportage on the next Ferrari, you can use eight pages to show every detail, because people will never come close to this thing.
Yeah.
On the other hand, of course, you have to tell people about the new things like VW, Opel, Ford, whatever, but not that, not that this content. And so I think that we tried to get more diverse, and that obviously worked, because we could start to do a German edition, or edition for Germany, one for Switzerland, and then last year's also one in English. And now that the circulation in the German printed edition is about 150,000 printed magazines. And that's quite a lot in days where they have told us, not possible, no way. But at the same time, we also started to invest a lot in the online communication and all the other things like Facebook, the social media. So actually more people working for Falstaff in this than in the printed side. And at the end of the day, we make also more money out of that.
Oh, great. Interesting point of view, a bit different, because everybody sounds desperate from the traditional media in the last couple of years. But let's switch on the wine talk.
Yeah.
So, as I already mentioned, you spent almost 1 week here in Serbia visiting different wine regions. So, but what really impressed you?
Let's maybe start 15 years ago, because 15 years ago I had the opportunity to come to Serbia for the very first time. It was a very short trip, so I didn't see that much different regions and wine districts. But even in these days, I was really impressed by the quality and by the potential. Some of these things were not that professional. We know all that development is going on and on. But what I took with me was the impression that there is a very interesting wine country with a beautiful landscape, nice people. So I always tended to say, if there's a chance to come back, I will do so. And last year I was invited to come to the first edition of the Wine Vision. And I said, of course, yeah, I'm coming, because I know there's great potential, and it would be great to see again what's going on. And luckily, I was sent a bunch of wines, but I don't remember exactly, 70 or 80 pre-selected wines from Serbia to taste them in my tasting room in Vienna, to get a first idea and what to expect. White and red, and some sparkling. I said, come on. That doesn't happen very often, that you get really impressed because you get something which you are not expecting. No, if you get very good champagne for a champagne tasting, you're not excited.
You're not surprised.
Yeah, exactly. You're not surprised, because you should expect this. But if it comes to a country which you're not familiar with, also varieties which you don't know, that's another story. You can say, okay, this is good, yeah, but it not necessarily takes your heart and says, wow, yeah. And that happened. So it was very nice to come to the fair, because that gave me the opportunity to go to stands and retaste things and talk a little bit to people. But it's one thing to come to a country and speak to the people directly on the winery, to see the vineyards, to get this idea of a region, of the Genius Lozi. This is a totally different thing, and that's the most important thing for a wine journalist, I think, because I was always traveling a lot. I immediately started when I started my career as wannabe wine writer in '88, and that helps a lot to interact, to feel, to see the terroir, to see the vineyards, the exposition. That's great, and that was the more or less the sense of my 6 days now. And so I made the next step. So I'm totally amateur with Serbian wines, of course. No, I'm not pretending to know anything, but my feeling is getting stronger and stronger.
Yeah. So yeah, but obviously you have some experience now with the Serbian wines, and from that point, what are for you are some of the trends to watch for in Serbian wine industry at the moment?
Well, okay, let's talk about my personal opinion, which I got, because we've got so many different varieties. On one hand, you've got the international ones, and of course, this is easier to compare in an international context. So, because if you've got a Cabernet Sauvignon, for instance, you can compare it to France, to Chile, to China, if you want. The same would be with Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, all these varieties. If it comes to the local varieties, this is a different story. We know that everybody is, for good reasons, very proud, or not, depends on the country, on the local varieties.
Yeah.
And I know from my experience that these are the door openers to a future international career of a wine country. Let's compare. In Austria, it was not Cabernet and Chardonnay which brought us into the international wine scene. It was wines like Grüner Veltliner, a little bit Riesling maybe, but this is a kind of international variety because we are not the only ones to do so. But Blaufränkisch, for instance, or Blauer Zweigelt, people abroad didn't know it all. So if we came to a sommelier 20 years ago and say, here's Grüner Veltliner, in America, for instance, Gruner, could not even spell
Gruner
it.
what?
Yeah, so they still call it Gruner in New York. But so the importance of local varieties is absolutely the one you have to follow. So, and what did we have here in Serbia? We have one red variety, Prokopac, which is obviously great, not good.
Thank you for
great.
saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had the opportunity over the last days to try some Prokopacs from different regions. So also style-wise, of course, there's differences, but at the end of the day, most of these wines showed true character, and I'm absolutely sure that this will be the one which brings Serbian wine on the world stage, for sure. Of course, we've got other things like the Grasac, for instance, from the Fruška Gora region. It's also a wine. It's a local variety. It's also local to your neighbors. Also in Austria, there's something available. But
actually, it's a Central European variety.
It is.
Yeah.
So we have to work on this maybe together, yeah, to bring it up, because it's also something very special. And we had samples of Grasac which showed the greatness of this variety in combination with the right place, with the right terroir. So of course, there is maybe some 50 other varieties to come from Serbia. Yesterday, we had the chance to taste together the Bagarina, which is very, very promising. But given the fact that there are only some hectares for the moment, available.
And only 2 or 3 wineries. Yeah.
So we will have to wait another 10 and 15 years, but I'm sure we will conquer this variety again. So if I'm getting old enough, if I'm surviving this trend, so to say, that it comes to the first great Wagrina wines international, then that could be something too. But not only those. I know that Damjanica is an issue, and I think to a certain extent, yes, of course, because it's a very pleasant wine, depends on the style, of course, and I'm not so sure about the varieties behind them, because there's a little Petit Grain and the Muscadet Tonnelle, or maybe sometimes there's a cuvée, but that doesn't matter. It's Damjanica. For me, it's more a style of a slightly aromatic, very fresh and delightful wine.
And almost always dry, which is not so usual.
For and I think that this kind of dry, lightly aromatic white wine for the summer, for other reasons too, will be successful. Yeah, and nobody cares about the varieties behind it, because it's Damjanica. It's from Serbia, and it's more, maybe it's more to seem like a brand at the end of the day, but
like a unique style, or
but think about expressions Chablis. People worldwide don't know which variety is behind it. They don't know that's a Chardonnay, or in Chianti they don't know that's Sangiovese. So who cares?
Yeah.
If it's a certain style of a wine from a specific region, that fits. No?
Good. So you had chance to taste some international varieties as well. Cabernet Sauvignons, Merlot, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, so from Serbia. What do you think? Is there a place for that wines on the Western market?
Yeah, sure. And I think knowing that these are the varieties where you will be compared to other places. Yeah? There are some specific varieties. Let's start maybe with Sauvignon Blanc. If we come to the Sauvignon Blanc from Chaumadilla, you have a very distinct character in this wine. They have a quite complex texture with a very, very fine freshness. And if I compare that, because think about Sauvignon means France, means New Zealand, a little bit America, maybe Chile, they are all different. So, or Austrian from Styria. Sauvignon is very much expressing the place where it's coming from. And I think that the Sauvignon Blanc from Chaumadilla is adding a new facet on Sauvignon. And as we know, there's a real trend on Sauvignon wines worldwide. In this context, there is a good potential for Sauvignon from Serbia, sure. Yeah. Chardonnay is another story, because Chardonnay is a variety which works a lot with, well, terroir, yes, but also with wood. So it's more a winemaker's variety for me.
Yeah.
So a very gifted winemaker will always be able to produce a very good, decent, or great Chardonnay, depending on his skills. So, of course, there are good ones. And with the red wines, with the international red wines, we had a big basket. Of course, Merlot was for me, the most present. Merlot as a monocépage is, as we know, it's a good variety. But I was personally more impressed by Cabernet Sauvignon. That's my personal taste. Merlot in Serbia has one thing which I have to reward with, because there's also a certain freshness in these wines, whether they are 14.5 point alcohol. They still keep this freshness, and this is something I would say, one word for Serbian wine would be drinkability, in a very positive sense, because you always got the feeling, oh yeah, let's have another glass. And that's good in terms of the market, because you not get you say, oh, this is too much of alcohol, it's too much of tannins, it's too much of wood, it's too much of everything. No, even those who are really, they have
ripe and warm.
We had
maybe.
a Cabernet yesterday with 15 degrees of alcohol, no problem. Yeah. And
it works. Yeah.
it works very well. No, it's not too much. It's very well integrated, and that it's also due to this certain specific, I would call it freshness. Yeah. And so Cabernet is, there are some examples, and also in Bordeaux, not every Cabernet is a great wine. There's only
course.
very few exceptions, and
Yeah.
these are the very famous ones. And then there's very good wine, and there's normal wine, and so on. That's everywhere the same. But if you can show that there are some people yet, because there's not a big number of producers in Serbia now,
Yeah.
and there are already some who are showing us these wines since, let's say, 10 years, from 13, 16, 17, 19, and so on. That's a good news, because that's not the end of the story, because it's just the beginning.
What are the lessons learned from the last year's Wine Vision Fair when it comes to communication with professional buyers and the general market? And are open Balkan countries, in your opinion, are ready for the big league, and what should be improved and built upon?
Well, I'm not a marketing expert, but, first of all, I think it was a very clever idea to bring the people to Belgrade, to bring them into the regions, and I think this is the most important thing also for the future. This is something, when I may make this comparison to Austria, what we did. Austria is a small country. Our wine production is limited. And in the 80s we had to start from the scratch after a big scandal, and more or less the wine industry was down to earth. And we said, okay, to convince people we have to bring them, like you did it more or less now with me, and because this is the most effective way to connect people. Because how can you build up trust? The best way is to talk to each other. And for that, we started to invite journalists, buyers, professionals from all over the world to come to Austria. We organized trips, showed them our country, not only the wine, but also our culture, our way of life, our gastronomy in a whole context. And this was the key, that was the access to the market, because then you hand over to the specific producers, and it's up to the producer in the different regions to show people what they are able to do. And I'm absolutely optimistic, because I met now some dozen of people, and they were all with such a, let's say, enthusiasm and full of ideas, and the progress is that fast. You can see these wonderful facilities already built, wineries. I'm sure nobody will expect. So, bring people to your country. This is the thing, that's the message to be given.
Good. You mentioned that scandal with diethylene glycol from 1985. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that shocked the Austrian wine industry to its core, and forcing it to start actually to anew when it comes to the buyers' trust and the public image.
Yeah.
In a sense, Austrian wine business had to start all over again to reinvent itself. And what were the key factors of reestablishing the former market position of Austrian wines? I'm asking you that because maybe there are some lessons to be learned for emerging wine region like ours that comes from the position of relative obscurity and have to build the public image from the scratch.
Maybe three things. First, we had to regain the trust of our own consumers, because most of the Austrian wine still today is consumed in Austria. And people said, "Oh no, I'm not drinking any Austrian wine. Maybe I will be killed by this stuff. So we are drinking beer now." So that's important, but that's not the case now in Serbia because there was no scandal.
Yep.
And I believe that people are quite proud of Serbian wines and found to drink it, sure. But even to reinforce this, to say, okay, we are extremely proud and we don't want to give away any bottle to other countries would be the first step. That's important. Sounds silly, but that's very much important. And we thought that these skillful wine lists in the restaurants showing the very best of Serbian wines, that's the way to show how proud you are. And if the people from abroad, tourists, experts, whoever, come and look at this, okay, of course they have some other wines from Bordeaux and so on, but firsthand they offer us the wines. And they're obviously very proud of it. That's important. The second step is you've got a community which is working in the professional way as a sommelier, wine director, whatever, all over the world. In our case, they also said, keep your Austrian wine at home, we don't want it, we take something from France, we are not interested in. So this were the first to be convinced because these guys are the ambassadors. If a restaurant in, let's say, Paris or Washington or wherever in the world is presenting an Austrian wine, this is worth millions for the rest of the national wine industry. So the next step is to bring the people, to show them what they've got. And it works, for sure. Yeah.
Good, great. And what are the main benefits, in your opinion, of regional cooperation projects such as Open Balkan when it comes to the wine business?
If you start to do things alone, say, that would be a Serbian affair to say that our vision fair here in Belgrade is only showing our wines and we invite everybody to come. Let's say Düsseldorf would say, okay, we are showing on first hand only German wines and okay. I think it's much more attractive for people coming into the country if they get the opportunity to see something else, which they also don't know. So it makes the whole thing much broader. Because this is a terra incognita, for most of the people, they heard about Albania or North Macedonia, but they would not even find it on the map.
Yeah.
They never had a wine from there. So if I can go to Serbia and taste a lot of Serbian wines, it's a good idea to have something aside. The outsiders would not come here to taste Italian wines, probably. That's something for the local experts and local clients because they're interested what's going on in Italy. So it's good to have it in this fair as well. But I think for those who are coming, they have so much to discover. And it's an additional facet, and it shows the team spirit. And team spirit is the most important element. That means starting with wine producers of a region have to cooperate in a way, in their communication, in the way they work together, they exchange their opinion. The next step would be national-wide, that they know if we are working together internationally, we are stronger. Not the one who said, oh, I'm going by my own, I will make it because I have my connections, I know these people, and I have this merchant, and I want to be the only one. No. And always, that could also be something we Austrians had to learn, start always in showing the best things. Start from the top, the rest is to follow.
Thank you for the advice. More than one connoisseur nowadays, it's not easy to please. Along with a good wine, they need to compelling story of the terroir and the people, the tradition, the gastronomy. And what are the Serbian and the Balkans' strongest points in that sense?
Yeah, as a journalist, I would say there is so much of unsung songs. Means there's every story coming from here is more or less a new story. So it is an easy task, yeah? If the quality fits. You can tell people whatever you want. If the wines are not good enough, that doesn't work. But if you tell the people the truth and show them what you've got, that will work. And I think that's the big thing and maybe something else. That's the point with the drinkability I mentioned before. I think that people are expecting maybe wrong things if they are coming to think about the Balkan wines, yeah? Because they have no experience at all. So you have a good chance to surprise them positively at every day. Yeah? And we are thinking about, okay, the Balkans, we're here in Belgrade today, maybe it gets up sometimes to 45 degrees, it's warm, it's hot, it's a hot climate, but it is not. The wines are up to 600 meters sea level. There's a cool breeze, there's a strong difference in night and day, which builds up the aromas perfectly in 20 degrees difference in summertime. So you get very elegant and fine wines. This is unexpected, no? And therefore I think I'd like to be you, not only in terms of age, but yeah. You've got the capacity of stories, which is that great. I wished I have that still for the Austrian wines. But I had my time 20 years ago, because we also had a lot of things to tell people. Still have.
This was real pleasure to talk with you in this podcast, and thank you for being here. Thank you for coming in Serbia, and I hope that we are going to see you soon here again.
Absolutely, and let me thank you for the invitation, but also yes, I have to express my thanks to the invitation to come to your great country, and to all these open-minded people I could meet in the last days. It was a sheer pleasure.
Thank you again.
Thank you.